Levi, who's doing this to you? Levi, come in.
This just in, the new hit show Wandavision is the talk of the town, but some people don't like its gimmick, while others love it. In today's episode, we're going to get to the bottom of that discussion. First, we're going to throw it to our expert. Levi, you're on the air.
Thanks, Levi. In the new Marvel series WandaVision, they present every episode in the style of a different decade of television. For example, the first episode is essentially just an episode of I Love Lucy with Wanda and Vision in the lead roles. That's the show's gimmick, and that's a word that comes with a lot of baggage. When something's accused of being gimmicky, that's usually a bad thing. You don't often see something being praised for how gimmicky it is. So is there a reason to use a gimmick? Is it bad to use a gimmick? It depends. Gimmicks aren't always bad, but they can be, depending on how you use them. There are three big questions that you need to ask yourself before including a gimmick in your story. Does the gimmick have an impact on the story? Does the gimmick attract more attention? And does the story need a gimmick in the first place? Before we get into those questions though, let's dig a little bit deeper into the question, what is a gimmick? A gimmick is something designed to attract attention, and they come in all shapes and sizes. You could look at movies from the 50s and 60s that went hard on gimmicks to compete with the rising popularity of television. 3D movies, Smell-O-Vision, or the many escapades of B-horror director William Castle. For example, Castle once guaranteed money back if you left before the end because you were too scared.
For the first time in screen history, a special interval will be provided during the running of this picture for refunding your admission. If you're unable to stand the almost unbearable suspense.
If you left the movie early though, you were met with signs calling you a coward and a nurse to make sure you weren't overwhelmed by fear. You could also look at crossover episodes of television or the invention of the mid-season finale. When it comes to books, there could be something about the cover that makes it stick out, like the subtle art of not giving a fuck. Or your story can rely on making a bunch of nostalgic references, like in Ready Player One. All gimmicks. So gimmicks have a bunch of different directions they can go, but before I get into what makes a good or bad gimmick, have you written a story with a gimmick in it? Or seen a gimmick that you enjoyed? Let me know down in a comment. Now, let's get into it.
Question number one. Does a gimmick have an impact on the actual story? Some gimmicks can distract from the plot. If the gimmick takes up too much space, then it can hurt the story. And if the story is bad, you can void any benefit you could have gained from the gimmick.
The story needs to earn the gimmick. The original Godzilla movie had a serious plot and tone, but as the series started to focus on professional wrestling style fights as its gimmick, the story suffered. Depending on the type of gimmick though, this might not be a huge issue. Advertising a giant fold-out map in your epic fantasy novel or having an off-kilter cover don't really have any kind of impact on the story. But if you're writing something like a crossover with Jimmy Neutron and Timmy Turner, it's going to affect the plot. So how does WandaVision's gimmick affect the story? Quite a bit. The first 2 or 3 episodes are almost entirely about exploring the gimmick, which is a dangerous move. A common criticism of the show is its slow start. The first couple of episodes only hint at the main conflict, but leave a lot to be desired. The series eventually digs into the meat of the conflict, but if someone wasn't on board with the gimmick from the start, they might not survive the first couple of episodes. In WandaVision's case, the gimmick raises the barrier for entry. WandaVision rides a fine line. I think it went too far at first, but I'm glad that as the main plot started to ramp up, they didn't abandon the gimmick. We still move through the decades in later episodes, even if there is slightly less emphasis on it. They adjusted the strategy to make more room for the main plot, which makes the gimmick put less pressure on the story. If they had abandoned the gimmick after relying on it so heavily in their marketing, it would have felt like a trick. If you make a promise with your gimmick, you have to follow through. If I was promised every decade of television, I would have been upset if they stopped after a few episodes in favor of a run-of-the-mill Marvel action plot. So gimmicks need to leave space for the story. The story always comes first, but also make sure you don't betray your gimmick. So where does that leave WandaVision? So far, in terms of its gimmick, not great. But let's take a look at our second question before we pass any judgment.
Question number 2. Does the gimmick garner attention? The definition of a gimmick is something designed to attract attention, and attention is great for marketing. Finding a way to stick out from the crowd can grow your audience. So gimmicks need to attract attention, or else they may not be worth doing, especially if they distract from your story. Although you do need to make sure you're attracting the right kind of attention.
If you're debating using a gimmick in your story, you'll have to balance the marketing value of the gimmick against its potential drawbacks. Usually, the bigger the gimmick, the more attention it can grab. But also the riskier it can be. It all depends on your target audience. Returning to William Castle, his gimmicks attracted attention for sure, but they wouldn't work on me. I have zero interest in being made fun of for leaving a movie I don't like. That gimmick probably worked better in the 60s, when the idea of the fearless man was more culturally significant. These days, I'm not going to a movie whose marketing talks down to me. It's that simple. That gimmick may alienate me, but I'm not likely to go watch a horror movie anyway, so I'm not exactly in the target audience. Castle's gimmicks appealed to an audience at the time, young people who wanted to prove how unafraid they were. The gimmick matched a target audience that was ripe for the taking. So let's look at WandaVision again. How does the history of television gimmick garner more attention? It promises a trip down memory lane, or at the very least, an interesting look at the history of television. But from how my friends feel about the show and what I've seen online, that gimmick can be divisive. Some people don't care about the history of television. I've heard people say that the gimmick is an outright turnoff for them. Why would they want to watch something in black and white? But then there's the other side, TV nerds and the people who grew up watching old TV, whether they watched it when it aired, or if it was the only thing on TV while trapped at grandma's house on Wednesday nights after band practice. Anyway, the gimmick doesn't garner universal attention, but it does fit a target audience. Superheroes in the MCU are a part of nerd culture, so exploring something they think nerds will like feels like a slam dunk. Plus, if you're watching a show on television, it's a pretty safe bet that you've watched other shows on television. So in WandaVision's case, I feel like it's a fantastic way to garner attention. It may alienate some people, but it hits the mark on its target audience, with some extra sugar on top. I think the marketing boost definitely outweighs any of the negative effects we talked about in the first question. But did WandaVision need a gimmick in the first place?
Question number 3. Do stories need gimmicks? Simply put, no. You can have a good story without a gimmick, but they do serve a purpose. Gimmicks can help your story stand out and can complement the plot if pulled off. But sometimes a gimmick can spoil a story that didn't need one.
While you don't need a gimmick, I think I would always take one if I could get it. Could is an important word there though. You can't always have one. Some stories just won't play well with a gimmick. So how do you make sure that your gimmick won't spoil or overshadow your story? As a general rule, don't force it. If a gimmick is too disconnected from the story, it can feel like a cheap trick. You don't want people to finish your story and think that the gimmick was completely unnecessary and only got in the way. A good way to help prevent this is to start with the story if you can. Working from gimmick to story will naturally put the story in the back seat when it should be in the front. Also, to reach full potential, gimmicks should fill a hole. Let's look at WandaVision without its gimmick. If the first couple of episodes were framed as regular life, no gimmick at all, they would be even slower than they are right now. Those first couple of episodes would be painfully boring. But since we spend time exploring the gimmick, it actually gives the writers the room they need to pull off a slow reveal without completely losing the audience's attention. WandaVision's gimmick fills a need in the story. It needs something interesting to fill the space between the slow reveal of details, and it does it with the charm of revisiting bygone eras of television. It pokes fun at tropes the audience knows, and even makes subtle references to other MCU films throughout the commercials. And like I said before, gimmicks are great for marketing. In terms of popularity, Wanda and Vision aren't A-tier Avengers, they're B or C tier at best. By default, their show is going to have less hype than an MCU character with more name recognition, like the upcoming Loki show. A show about Vision and Wanda is at a natural disadvantage compared to the other Marvel shows coming out. I'm not a huge fan of the MCU. I wasn't super interested in WandaVision based off the name alone, but once I saw the trailer and the gimmick, I was all in. I can't say if they had the idea for the gimmick or the story first, but WandaVision's gimmick fills a hole in the story structure and its marketing. I'd call that a success. There's a lot of places gimmicks can take you, and when you're writing, think about the questions I've talked about. Does the story need a gimmick? How will that gimmick affect the story? And how will it bring attention to the story? The answers to those questions will help you balance the pros and cons. Maybe you're working on a serious piece, but want a little extra sauce to help your story find an audience. Or maybe you're going full Sharknado and plan on writing a gimmick all the way to the bank. Or maybe you don't need one at all. Only you know your story, so only you can answer those questions. Back to Levi in the booth.
In conclusion, write what you want, have fun, and thanks for watching. Thanks for watching, and now for a word from our sponsors. Introducing Campfire Blaze, the writing software of the future. Plan your plot with Blaze's timelines, keep track of all your story's information with character sheets and maps, and write your story in the manuscript module. Interested in world building? Blaze is filled to the brim with the tools you need to build a vibrant world. And the best part? It's free to try. Just check out the link in the description. Campfire Blaze. Write better stories faster. Write better stories faster.